Hey, what's up, guys? Dragon here with another episode of Idle Chatter. Today, I kind of wanted to talk about something that we hear a lot about in like media. By the way, sorry if my hair is wet. I just got out of the shower and forgot to let it dry. So here we are, me with wet hair. So take it as you will. And if you hear a scratching sound, it is this little ball of fluff trying to get my attention. So there you go. You have my attention. Say hello to the nice people, Tally, on Patreon. She's like, oh, I didn't think this through. This is a bad idea. Okay, be free. Bye. Should be scratching at the chair the entire video. But anyway, one of the things I wanted to talk about today was a term we often hear, especially in regards to like film, which is a cult classic or a cult hit or something that has a cult following. And, you know, that usually applies to a film, book, franchise of some kind, games, even television, that while having a die-hard fan base, never really broke out in the mainstream, or sometimes even flopped altogether, but over a period of time kind of cultivates a very kind of rigid fandom that adheres itself to whatever it is, and basically, you know, essentially just kind of keeps it going, almost kind of turns it into a bit of a legend in and of itself, and kind of propagates this legend. You know, and you see it a lot in film, especially. We're living in an age now where nostalgia is all the rage, and a lot of nostalgia comes from the 80s. I mean, a lot of people kind of wonder why that decade became so synonymous with so much of what, you know, we can really kind of consider almost like our modern day legend. And the big thing about the 80s was the advent of kind of home media, the VHS tape or the Betamax tape. For those of you who remember those or even are aware what they are, Google it. Prior to this, for instance, if a film was released in theaters or cinemas, if you didn't see it in the theater, that was it. Once it was gone, once it kind of finished its rotation, that was it. It was over with. And sometimes they would re-release films over a period of time, and that was kind of like either your second chance to see it again, or perhaps even your first chance if it's a film that maybe came out when you were too young or even before you were born. But with the advent of like home media, these films, these stories could kind of just live on, and it is for a lot of people where they kind of discovered what became cult classics. A great example of this is a film kind of called The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, which is based on a short story called Who Goes There. There was an earlier adaptation of that story called The Thing from Another World, but John Carpenter's take on the story was the closest to the source material. And this is a film that, if you tend to hear in social circles today, is spoken very highly of. It's a film that is regarded as, you know, a major influence in terms of what a lot of people call creature feature cinemas or science fiction horror, and it's kind of held in the same regard as films like Ridley Scott's Alien or James Cameron's Aliens. You know, a film that is, you know, broke a lot of new ground both in visual effects, narrative, and just being a, you know, damn good scary movie. However, when this film came out, it complete flopped. It tanked, did horrible at the box office. And once upon a time, a decade earlier, that would have been it. That would have been it for the movie. It would, if it didn't do well at the box office, you know, you would have never heard of it again. It probably would not have gotten a re-release. Usually that was only kind of reserved for very big films, very iconic films. I mean, they've done it with King Kong, a lot of Disney films. But, you know, a movie like The Thing, for instance, had it not been for home release, that probably would have been it, you know, at least for a while. If home media hadn't developed, say, for maybe another 10, 15 years, it might have been that long before anyone ever saw that film again, or for most people saw it, period. Which for a lot of people, that's where they saw it, was in the video store, myself included. I would go to one of our local video stores back when they had VHSs, those big blocks that you would rolls of film inside that you have to put to a VCR, and sometimes you have to hit the tracking button if the film was all messed up. Something anyone born in the 80s and before knows exactly what I'm talking about. And that's where we discovered a lot of these films. And I would remember I would always kind of peruse the science fiction horror section, just looking for something new. I never really went to the new release sections. If there was usually a movie that I really wanted to see that was new coming out, I would see it in theaters. And after that, I didn't really wait for movies to come out on video. It was either if I wanted to see it, if it looked interesting, I'd go see it, and if I liked it, I would buy the VHS tape, or really my parents would. And if I didn't, then there was nothing in the new release section for me, because quite frankly, again, it was one of those situations where if I wanted to see it, it would have came out in theaters. So I would kind of start going through like kind of these genre sections, science fiction, horror, fantasy, what have you. And that's where I would discover a lot of these films. And for a lot of us, that's how we all discover these films. I would see films like The Thing, Blade Runner, Deep Star 6, Leviathan, all these films that have cult followings, but never really crack the mainstream. While they are known in the mainstream, they do not hold the same kind of mass commercial appeal as, say, a Spider-Man movie, for instance, or a Star Wars movie. It's very rare that these kinds of very specific genre films really do crack the mainstream. Star Wars is a great example of that, if not the best example of all time, in that where it is very much a genre picture, but became like the biggest film franchise of all time. Another good example of that, leaning more towards John Carpenter's thing, is the Alien franchise. Very much a creature feature down to the letter, and yet it exploded and it became a global phenomenon. But for every movie like that, there is another that just doesn't quite make it, doesn't quite reach that height of popularity, and yet we find ourselves 30 plus years later seeing these films now be released on high definition special edition Blu-rays with hours of bonus features and content and commentaries from actors and writers and directors and interviews on films that were largely ignored when they came out, but were kind of kept alive by the love of the fandom, by the love of the people who had discovered these films and felt they were a special experience. Because a lot of times when you go to the movie theater, and you're going to see a big movie, I'll use like a Marvel film as an example. And by the way, this isn't me hating on Marvel or mainstream films. I love big budget A-list movies too. But just giving examples, like a lot of times when you go see a Marvel film, regardless of how much you know about it or the characters, how popular they are compared to other Marvel characters, this is going to be a big deal movie. It's going to be an event film to some degree. And it's not going to be a film that's just going to be over and gone with and just kind of forgotten. It's going to be a big deal. So usually when you go see a film like that, even if you end up enjoying it, it's not really a surprise. You might end up liking it, perhaps maybe even a little bit more than you expected. But ultimately, if you're going to see a Marvel movie, chances are you probably have seen previous Marvel films, and you come to expect a certain level of quality. You have expectations for these films, and you have them because they are regularly met. So it comes as no surprise when you go and see Black Panther and it delivers everything you wanted. When you go see Ant-Man and the Wasp and it gives you what you wanted. And when you go and see Thor Ragnarok, which is one of my favorites, and it dazzles you. You come to expect that. But when you go and in the old days when we would go and you look at your local video retailer, would be a Blockbuster or Hollywood Video, or kind of the local mom and pop video store, which is where you found all the gems. And you find something, you would look at the cover, it would have maybe an interesting cover, something that would catch your eye. You would flip it over and have like the synopsis, long synopsis. And usually the older films had even longer, synopsis on it. And you would read it, and based on what you were seeing on the cover, sometimes what you'd see on the spine, and what you read, you're like, okay, let's give this a shot. And sometimes, they weren't always winners. Sometimes you'd be like, well, there's that. But a lot of times, for a lot of us, especially those of us who were kind of too young in the 80s to see a lot of these movies in theaters. We were around, but we were still a little just too young. We discovered a lot of these films in the 90s on VHS, going to our video stores and renting these movies and discovering them that way. And as we fell in love with these films, we, came of age and we kept it going. We kept talking about it. And now we become directors. Now we become writers. Now we own our own production companies. We own our own distribution companies. So when you have companies like, Shout Factory, and they have their little subsidiary called Scream Factory, and they are releasing films like Pumpkinhead, written and directed by the late great Stan Winston, flopped. John Carpenter's The Thing, flopped. Other films, not even just kind of sci-fi horror, but films like Blade Runner, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, arguably today one of the greatest science fiction films of all time, The Final Cut. A film that has influenced a great many people. You could argue, kind of co-authored in the visual aesthetic of like cyberpunk, a lot of it. Something you saw a lot of in anime from like the 80s and part of the 90s, where that kind of very grand, gritty future, technological future, a lot of those visual components were, founded in that film. And yet that movie tanked at the box office, did not do very well. Flash forward 30 plus years, and we have a sequel that is, once upon a time, no one would ever have believed would have been made. The Thing had a prequel back in 2011, I believe, and while, in my opinion, not exactly a worthy successor to the legacy of John Carpenter's film, the fact that someone wanted to make a film that was connected to Carpenter's film was only so because that film had developed what they called a cult following. It didn't do gangbusters at the box office, but it reached a lot of people, and a lot of people discovered that film on home media. A great modern, really example today of this is the series on Netflix, Stranger Things, which is a beautiful love letter to films from the 80s, from, Goonies, Stand By Me, Alien, Critters, Gremlins, The Thing, movies like that. And it is created by the Duffer Brothers, who are in their early 30s, which means, like me, they would have been really too young to see a lot of these films in theaters during the 80s, but like me, discovered these films, at the video store or on cable. A lot of times at night, sometimes they would have late night films, and if you couldn't sleep, you would turn on TV and you would see these cool monster movies that would come out late at night. And sometimes during the day on cable, they would have these cool movie marathons where it's like 4 movies in a row, and you would sit there all day watching. And that was kind of the, I guess you could say, the prototype of streaming media. That was how we binge watch stuff, that we didn't own, in terms of physical media. Like, cable would have a monster movie marathon, 4 monster movies in a row, and you would just plop down on the couch all day and just watch these movies. And that's how a lot of us found these films, was either on cable or at the video store. And it's because we would talk about it. We would show our friends. We would rent the movie, bring our friends over. They would watch it, and we would talk about it. And then we just kept these discussions going. And then, years later, you become an adult, and we're still talking about these movies. And then when they re-released the, big remastered 4K Blu-ray edition, it's not, the mainstream audience that's running out and getting it. It's people like me, and maybe people like yourself, who grew up seeing this film at home, who have memories of watching these films on the couch or sitting on the floor looking up at the TV, discovering these films. And because you weren't seeing them in a big theater with, dozens of people or so, it almost felt special. It felt like it was something special for you. Like you had uncovered this gem, which, by and large, that's what everyone was doing. Everyone at the same time was uncovering these gems. But because it's just you alone, the film and yourself, it feels something special. Like you found something. So you develop this affinity, this connection with this film, because it feels special. It almost feels personal, like it's a private moment, as opposed to, again, going to a movie theater, which has its own mystique to it too. When you go to the movie theater and the lights go down, and you experience something on the big screen with an entire audience, and you know, ooh and ah, and laugh and scream together. You know, that is its own experience in and of itself. But that isn't the experience you tend to get for like a film that has more mass appeal, a film that appeals to a larger audience and has more commercial success. Hence why the theater is packed and everyone's oohing and ahhing. But when you have these more one-on-one experiences of you and the film, or the TV show, or even the book or the comic, it feels special because not everyone is talking about it. And when you do come across someone who is talking about it, it's even more special. It's like, wow, there's someone else. There's another person liking me out there. And then you get excited because you're so used to kind of just enjoying this thing by yourself that when you come across somebody else and you're able to kind of, you know, vocalize your love of it, your enjoyment of it with another person, it almost has this surreal quality, which makes it all the more special because you realize that kind of experience is more rare. Or again, you walk out of the theater after seeing a big, you know, A-list movie that, you know, is doing very well for itself, you know, and everyone is saying the same thing. That was amazing. That was great. So, and rightfully so. But it doesn't feel as special in a way because, you know, you and everybody else like the movie. No big surprise there. But when you come across something that not everyone's talking about, that maybe not everyone knows about, it feels special. It feels like something personal. And it's something that kind of sticks with you and shapes you. It's something that you kind of pull more from because you don't get bored of it as quickly. Because when somebody's talking about something else a lot, you know, you're exposed to it everywhere you go. You know, you go outside, you'll see the marketing for it on the boxes of cereal. You know, you see the commercials on TV. You go to the movie theater, you see the trailer before the movie you're watching. You're on YouTube, you see the trailer everywhere. You see trailer reactions, which, yeah, I'm guilty of doing. You know, you see ads for it, so you don't need to necessarily focus as hard on it to kind of get your fix of it because it's everywhere you look. But a film like, you know, Blade Runner in the mid to late 80s, you weren't seeing stuff about it everywhere. It wasn't part of some cinematic universe. It was something that came and went, and people who saw it knew about it, and then people who discovered it on home media discovered it that way, and it built a cult following. More and more people discovered it, and as someone would find it, discover it, they'd be like, tell their friends, their family, hey, you got to check out this movie, and then that person would watch it, and then they would tell someone else, like, hey, there's this amazing movie, you need to see it, and it would just spread. And it's an interesting phenomenon because there have been films that have come out and done exceptionally well, and then kind of disappear, or films that even, for instance, when they are released, they do well, and then they kind of dissolve and they develop a cult following after the fact, which is it's almost a great example of this would be The Relic from 1997, which is based on the book Relic by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. The book is one of my favorite books of all time. And while the film isn't necessarily the best adaptation of the book, it's a really good movie. And if you kind of just separate the film from the book and just look at the film as a film with no connection to the source material, it functions very well, and it's a damn good movie. So just kind of my opinion for those is just take one as a completely different thing and take the other as something completely different as well. And just look at them both as having a similar premise, basically. But the film was essentially a genre film. It was a creature feature. The special effects were done by Stan Winston, Billy Stan Winston, I should say. And when it came out, not a lot was known about it. And if you weren't familiar with the book, you really didn't know what it was. And myself, I didn't know what the film was about. I read the book about a year or so after the book came out, or I read the book a year or so after the movie came out. So not a lot of people knew what it was, and this was in the very early days of the internet where films started having websites where you could go to the website and watch the trailer that would, you know, the 2.5 minute trailer that would take about an hour to download. And this film came out. It did exceptionally well. It was #1 at the box office. Critics loved it. It had rave reviews. It was like the scariest movie of the year. And then it just kind of faded out. It just went away and became a cult hit. And one of the reasons this was because this was very much a genre film. And again, when I say genre film, I mean something like a creature feature, something like a space opera, something like a slasher film, a film that is very specific in its subject matter. It's targeting one type of subject matter, which is going to, and the more focused the subject matter, the more, the smaller the group, if you will, it's probably going to watch it. And what I mean by that is, it's going to appeal to a much more finite sensibility. So people who tend to just like that sort of thing. So sometimes a genre film can kind of crack the mainstream, kind of breach the surface, either through marketing, ambiguity, and for The Relic, I feel it was a lot of people didn't know what it was. And because of that, a lot of people were just curious by the movies. They went and saw it. If the film had been kind of promoted more directly as what it was, I think a lot of people would have been like, well, I don't really watch those kinds of movies. And everyone who watched those kinds of movies would have been like, hell yeah, we're going to go see that movie. But because they didn't really cast too much of a spotlight on really what the film was about, kind of everyone and anyone went and saw it. And I kind of liken probably the viewing experience to a receding tide. Like all the water rushes in, and then it pulls back and it leaves behind certain things. The rest of everything gets pulled back in. And I feel with a film like that, the reason why it just became a cult hit, despite having done very well at the box office, was kind of the obscure nature and the marketing and people not really knowing what this film was, giving you just enough to tease you to kind of capture your interest, but not enough to really kind of tell you, hey, what this film is. So because of that, everyone got curious and went and saw the film. And I'm sure there was a lot of people who walked out saying, oh, I didn't realize it was going to be a monster movie, or I didn't realize it was going to be so gory. Meanwhile, the people who love monster movies and gory movies are like, that was awesome. And those are the people who continue to talk about that film. Those are the people who continue to love that film, to buy that film on VHS, to buy that film on DVD, to buy that film on Blu-ray, to, you know, purchase it as a digital download long after all those other people quickly lost interest because it was one of, you know, those movies. You know, so there are moments where these cult films can experience moments of mainstream success, and we live in a time now where a lot of genre films are achieving mainstream success. Films that once upon a time would have been just cult hits are doing very well. Again, Stranger Things, while I know not a movie per se, I would say each season kind of feels like a longer movie. It feels less like a TV show and more like a film. And it's interesting because a lot of the subject matter, the nature of what that series is very much the stuff of kind of cult media. It's based on and influenced by a lot of things that were cult hits. The majority of what, it's influenced by were things that did not do exceptionally well at the box office. I mean, there are the exceptions. The two biggest ones I would say are, Alien and The Goonies. In season 2, more Aliens. But it's also pulling from a lot of other films that didn't necessarily do that great. And because of that, a lot of the people who watch it now don't even realize that it's being based on this or being based on that. But for them, it is kind of their first exposure to like a genre type story, type film. And through Stranger Things, a lot of people now are going back and just out of curiosity and looking up, seeing what is this influenced by? This is such a cool show. I love this so much. Is there more out there like this? And then come to find out, yeah, there's basically a whole decade of films that are like this, and people are now discovering. Even more people are discovering these cult classics for the first time, and they're able to do so because of home media. Because these films were coming out in an era when, even if a film didn't do very well at the box office and didn't stay very long in the theater, people would have a chance to see it. And for a lot of people, that would be where they saw it. Much like today when you'll see a movie, trailers for a movie, and you're like, I don't know if I want to spend X amount of dollars at the movie theater to see that, but I know in like 3 months or so it'll be, available for digital download or what have you. I'll just wait then and then, go to PSN and just download it real quick and check it out that way. It was for a lot of people the same way. Once VHS kind of took off and home media became an established, source for entertainment, a lot of people were just opting out of seeing these films in theaters because they didn't know if they wanted to Go to a crowded movie theater, sit with somebody else, maybe sit in an uncomfortable seat, have to put up with someone talking through the whole movie, chewing loudly. Someone brought their baby, and now the baby's crying. The popcorn prices are ridiculous. I have to get up and pee now. I'm not feeling too good. I got to work in the morning. I don't know if I want to go out tonight. But they knew that, well, back then it wasn't a few months, it was close to a year, but at least they knew that at some point, if they didn't go to the movie theater to see this film, they would have a chance to check it out in the privacy and comfort of their own home. So people would wait 6, 7, 8 months for a movie to come out on VHS, rent the VHS tape and go home and watch it on their couch in their underwear, eating a hoagie. And people would do that. And because of that, films that while maybe weren't given their fair shot in the movie theater were given a second chance at home. And that's why a lot of these films, these genre films, became cult classics. Again, home media. So it is no surprise that we live in an age now where nostalgia kind of equals the 80s or vice versa, because the 80s is when a lot of filmmakers had more license to make these films, knowing that even if they didn't do super well at the box office, they could kind of find a life of their own in another medium. Whereas once upon a time, these films had to appeal to a much more commercial audience because that was it. The theater was it. If it didn't do well in cinemas, then you lost it all. So, again, we live in an age now where nostalgia reigns supreme, it seems, and where cult hits are now finding mainstream success, because so much of what defined yesteryear was done so kind of under the radar. It was for every big movie that did exceptionally well, there were 5 or 6 smaller ones that ended up influencing someone who is now making, the big mainstream commercial product that everyone's talking about, and sprinkling in a lot of those elements that they fell in love with these smaller films. And people are starting to be conditioned to that. People are starting to look for these kinds of elements in film and television, streaming media, what have you. And because of that, films that once upon a time would have been just cult are now developing a more mainstream appeal, because the movie-going audience has slowly become more conditioned to these kinds of stories, these kinds of films, because the people who were influenced by these smaller films and stories and what have you have started putting it into their work. And when they achieve mainstream success, they're kind of bringing those influences with them. So it's almost a bit of like a Trojan horse. I would say that Stranger Things is a Trojan horse. It is this super big popular thing that has launched the careers of a lot of these young actors. And yet it is comprised of, that which once upon a time a lot of the mainstream audiences would have turned their nose up. Again, there are the exceptions. You have your Gremlins, you have your Aliens, you have your Goonies, films that did well, but they're also pulling from things that did not do as well. So, cult hits, they are labors of love, and they are truly the result of I feel, a passion from a fandom, in the sense that we wouldn't be talking about them today if there were not people out there who were keeping them alive, keeping them alive in their heart, loving them as much as they do. Because there are films that do very well, but people don't necessarily love them. They just enjoy them. They're a means of quick entertainment. I mean, you look at something like McDonald's, for instance. McDonald's probably makes some of the cheapest food in the world, and yet they are a multi-billion-dollar company. They probably feed more people the world over than some of the best chefs in the world. And then you go to that mom and pop restaurant, that local little place that's run by a family, for 2 or 3 generations, and the food there is just exquisite. It is like the best food you'll ever have, but not a lot of people know about it. It's this small thing, and because it's so small, they can put so much of love into it. And the reason why this little place stays open, it's because the people who know about it love it and support it. They keep going back. They tell their friends. They bring their family over. They host events there because they love it so much, and they don't want it to go away. So they keep it alive. Whereas something like McDonald's, yeah, we all go to McDonald's. It's quick. It's easy. It's it's cheap. When you're hungry and you just want to just fill your stomach with something, it does the job. It's not going to evoke the same sense of love and care that you would go for that, that little local, Italian restaurant, or that Vietnamese restaurant, or that little sushi joint on the corner where, the people who make the food, put love into it and really enjoy and care what they do and really want you to have the kind of experience they would want to have eating the food. Same thing with these films. A lot of times they're made by people who really, really love this stuff and have a blast and don't really care that they're not making the next Citizen Kane, but have fun making the kind of thing they would want to watch, the thing that makes them happy, the thing that puts them a smile on their face. And it is because of the love that's put into these cult classics, these cult hits, that it transcends time. It stands a test of time, where films and television that do exceptionally well kind of come and go. They're like kind of flash in the pan. When it hits, it's super bright and everyone sees it, and then it kind of goes. But these smaller things, these smaller films, these cult hits, kind of permeate throughout pop culture. And then someone who grew up watching it and enjoying it now, is directing a $150 million movie, and they're adding that sensibility to this big movie, and now exposing a mass audience to that sensibility. So again, it's an interesting time we live in, because so much, like I said, of what we considered kind of genre entertainment, things that were kind of at best going to be just a cult hit, are finding mainstream success now. And again, it is because so many people who are making these, mainstream hits now were influenced by these smaller films, and they are bringing that sensibility to the mainstream. And as such, the mainstream audience is kind of being conditioned, and their perception of media and entertainment is starting to shift. So now you'll go see a big budget movie, and it'll resemble more something that would have come out 30 years prior, but would have been a much smaller story, a much smaller film, and would not have had nearly the kind of buzz that it has today. So for that reason alone, I mean, again, for all of us who kind of hung in there and kind of, clung to these shows and these movies and really kept them afloat and kept them from just sinking into oblivion, it's a rewarding time, because we see the kinds of films we love now kind of being rediscovered and being just flat out discovered by people now who are saying these films are amazing and incredible, and as such they get sequels and now remakes and reboots, and it's just, Critters is being remade. I love the Critter movies, especially the first one when I first discovered, like in 1994. I kind of just rented it on a whim. I'd always seen the VHS, cassette tape and kind of the 80s and 90s and early 90s. I was kind of like, And one day I was like, screw it, let me just rent it and see what it's all about. And I just fell in love with the movie. And but I would have never have thought that it was going to become, this thing, and it was one of those movies that, the weird kid like me found in the genre section of the video store. It wasn't the thing that everyone at school was talking about. It wasn't that kind of movie. But now I see everyone's talking about it. People reference it. People know what it is, and it's very surreal, but very kind of satisfying. Because it feels like, for those of us who grew up watching these kinds of films, it feels like we hung in there. We didn't care what was cool or what was popular. We loved what we love, and we didn't apologize for it. And now these kinds of films are getting kind of the recognition that we always felt they deserve. And now we're able to kind of introduce them to different people. So if you're one of those people who haven't watched any of these films that I've been kind of just rambling off, don't feel like it's an elitist mentality. Don't feel like it's like, well, you're not one of us or one of the mainstream. No, please, watch these films. I'll have like a list kind of right now. I'll have a list kind of going down right now that kind of with all several names of films. Just take a screenshot. Pause this, write them down. Go check them out. I mean, we live in a time now where you could just download these things digitally, click of a button. You don't have to go out of your house, put on pants, and go to some video store or some rental place and try to track it down. You can just, rent it or even watch it for free. But yeah, watch them, and kind of maybe see now what it was that we fell in love with, and how they had stood the test of time, and why they stood the test of time. And it's not to say that all these films are masterpieces, but they're fun, and there's love in them, and that translates to you, the viewer or the reader. I mean, there's a lot of books too, for instance, comic books even, that maybe never had mainstream success, but again developed a cult following, and for the people who discover them, fell in love with them, and like a lot of that over time, developed a big enough following where now they're more mainstream. And you've seen that with a lot of things. The Ninja Turtles started as a Mirage comic, a weird little indie comic for grown-ups. That wasn't a huge hit, but then they got an animated series that turned the Ninja Turtles into like a household name. So again, there's a lot of things out there now that are easier than ever to discover for the first time for a lot of people, and for some people to rediscover too. I know I've talked to a lot of people too. They said, "Oh, I remember that movie. I haven't watched that in years," and it's something they loved when they were younger, and then just kind of went away and they forgot about it, and now they're able to kind of find it all over again and kind of fall in love with it all over again. So it's a great time for that alone. But yeah, that's kind of really all I want to talk about today. Again, something we all hear about, again, like a cult classic, a cult hit, and what does that mean versus a hit? What is a cult classic versus a box office success? Again, the Evil Dead franchise is another great example of a cult classic. Everybody knows about it. So many people reference it, and yet these films never did exceptionally well. Again, it's not uncommon, but they are kept. If you hear someone talking about it, it's because there were enough people who refused to let it die, and that is kind of the charm of a cult hit, a cult classic, is that it exists because people love it, not because of commercial pressure, not because a bunch of executives who market it a certain way to keep it. No, we're talking about it today because we kept it alive, and now we're in a position where we can kind of give back to these films that we grew up loving and kind of restore them and give them the attention and focus that we always felt they deserve, so we can introduce them to a brand new audience and people who otherwise would never know about them or see them, and now can discover them and fall in love with them like we did and kind of keep their legend going. But yeah, so that's going to do it for this one. Again, so all I wanted to really talk about, and again, this whole series is going to be just more chit-chatty, me just kind of, talking about things in media and pop culture that are of interest to me, that I kind of have conversations with my wife and friends about, and figured, well, just put a camera in front of me and see if any of you guys have an interest in it. But yeah, so that's going to do it for this one. As always, I want to thank all of you, our patrons, for your generous support. It means a lot to me, to Ashley, and again, it helps us not just motivate us to keep doing this, but also kind of helps us do more for you. And again, the more you guys contribute, the more we can kind of give back, because again, I love doing this kind of stuff, and again, I love I love knowing that there's people out there who share similar interests, and maybe we don't mind sitting down for about 45 minutes with a bearded man like myself and just kind of listen to him give his thoughts. But anyway, guys, that's gonna do it this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.